You moved as though you had always known the way, your steps leading you straight into the living room, where the fire still flickered in the hearth. I closed the door behind you and followed you inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, like the lingering weight of unshed words. You stood near the fire, rubbing your hands together, though whether it was the cold or nerves you were trying to shake off, I couldn't quite tell. I watched you from the doorway, arms folded, resisting the ridiculous urge to ask if you wanted a drink, as if that would somehow bridge the unfamiliar distance between us. "You actually came," I said at last, my voice even, betraying none of the curiosity I felt. You huffed a quiet laugh, though there was little amusement in it. "Surprised?" "Somewhat." You glanced toward the bottle of wine on the table, the single glass beside it. Your brows lifted slightly, and before I could offer an excuse, you spoke. "You didn't think I'd show up?" "Not particularly." I moved past you, retrieving a second glass from the kitchen without further comment. When I returned, you had settled into the chair across from mine, watching the fire with an expression I couldn't quite read. I poured the wine, handing you the glass, and you accepted it with a small nod. For a while, we simply sat there, the warmth of the fire flickering between us. The silence was not entirely uncomfortable, but it pressed in around the edges, waiting to be broken. You swirled the wine in your glass, staring into it as if searching for something in the depths of the red. "It's strange," you murmured, "being back here, in this house. I remember sneaking past it when we were kids, thinking it looked abandoned." I let out a quiet scoff. "It might as well have been." You looked up at me then, studying me in that way you always had, as if trying to pull apart the layers I kept so carefully in place. "I think we were 7 when we first met. Do you remember?" I did. Of course I did. "You were sitting on the riverbank," I said, surprising myself with how easily the memory surfaced. "Poking at the water with a stick. I thought you were trying to catch something." You grinned faintly. "I was. There was a frog, and I was determined to scoop it up." "You were failing spectacularly." "Well, you didn't have to say it like that." A smirk ghosted across my lips before I could stop it. "You nearly fell in." Your grin widened, and you pulled me back. I took a sip of wine, glancing at the fire. "You were annoying," I muttered, though there was no bite to the words. "Always asking questions, always following me around. You didn't seem to mind. I didn't respond to that because you weren't wrong." The conversation flowed more easily after that, the years between us peeling away as we spoke of childhood, of stolen summer afternoons by the river, of whispered conversations in the alleyways of Spinner's End. For the first time in years, I found myself lost in something other than my own thoughts. And for once I didn't mind the company. The firelight flickered lazily. The room cocooned in the warmth of nostalgia and wine. The weight of the day, of grief and expectation, had begun to loosen its grip on us. I could feel it in the way my shoulders relaxed against the chair, in the way your posture softened as you swirled the last remnants of wine in your glass, lost in thought. It was strange how easily the years peeled away in conversation. For once, we were not 2 adults carrying the burdens life had placed upon us. We were simply 2 people remembering a time when things had been simpler. The childhood streets of Spinner's End, the riverbank where we wasted long summer days, the small victories of youth that had seemed so monumental back then. And then, as memories often do, the conversation found its way to a pivotal moment, one that had changed everything between us. You had always known I was different, even before I told you, even before you saw it for yourself. It started with small things, things that could have been dismissed as coincidences or the wild imaginings of a child. You would lose something, only for it to turn up exactly where you swore it hadn't been a moment before. A book that should have tumbled from my grasp would stop mid-air before I caught it. The wind would pick up unnaturally when I was angry, swirling with a force that didn't quite belong in the ordinary grey streets we roamed. But it wasn't until that afternoon by the river that you truly understood. We had been exploring, as we often did, pushing past the usual limits of where we were supposed to go. We had been playing near the old iron bridge, balancing on its crumbling stone ledges as if the drop below was nothing more than a challenge to overcome. You had always been reckless in your own way, fearless, unbothered by the risk of scraped knees or soaked shoes. You had slipped, a slip of your foot against the damp, moss-covered stone, and suddenly you were gone, arms flailing as gravity claimed you. I didn't think. There was no time to think. Instinct took over, something deeper than logic or hesitation. Before you could hit the ground, I reached out, not physically but with something else, something unseen. You stopped, suspended in mid-air, your body hovering just inches from the ground. For a heartbeat, the world was utterly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Your eyes locked on mine, wide with something I couldn't quite name. And then, just as easily, I let you down. You landed softly, your legs unsteady beneath you, but you didn't run, didn't scream. You just stared at me, lips parted slightly, as if trying to find the right words. I had braced myself for the inevitable, for fear, for rejection, for the moment you would turn and disappear. Instead, you simply accepted it, as if it was just another truth of the world, no stranger than the seasons changing or the river flowing. That had been the moment I realized you were different too. Not in the way I was, not in the way that could be measured by spells or incantations, but in the way that mattered. You had seen something impossible, something unnatural, and instead of turning away, you had accepted it without question. That moment had been the first real secret I ever shared with someone willingly. In the years that followed, it would be joined by many more, some insignificant teenage dreams, others far heavier to bear. Time had passed quickly as we had been lost in memories and conversation, and suddenly it was long after midnight. The fire had burned low in the grate, glowing embers casting shifting shadows across the walls. The bottle of wine sat nearly empty between us, our glasses untouched for the last hour as words had taken precedence over everything else. It had been years since I had spoken so freely, since I had allowed myself to slip into the past without the usual bitterness that accompanied it. The weight of the day had faded into the background, grief momentarily forgotten in the warmth of recollection. For a few hours we had been nothing more than two people revisiting a world that no longer existed, a world of childhood, of simpler times, before life had set us on separate paths. But reality had a way of creeping back in, and the clock on the mantel betrayed just how late it had become. You sighed when you noticed, stretching slightly as if only just realizing how long you had been sitting there. The evening had slipped away without either of us meaning it to. You stood, smoothing down your dress, casting a glance toward the door with reluctance. I could tell you hadn't expected to stay so long, that perhaps you had told yourself you would only stay for a single drink, only exchange a few words before leaving. And yet, here we were. As you reached for your coat, you hesitated. There was something unspoken in the air between us, something uncertain. This night had been an exception, an unexpected detour in the carefully constructed paths we walked. But soon you would return to your life in London, and I to Hogwarts, and whatever had brought us here tonight would surely fade into memory like everything else. You turned back to me, searching my face for something, perhaps reassurance, perhaps an answer neither of us had yet found. You wanted to see me again before we left this place behind, before the world separated us once more. For a brief moment I considered telling you that you didn't have to leave, that you could stay the night. Some part of me longed to hold on to the fleeting ease of the evening, to the strange weightlessness that had come with it, that feeling of trust and safety I hadn't realized I'd missed. But I did not say it. Instead, I gave a short nod, an agreement, an unspoken promise. Something in your expression eased. You lingered for just a second longer before finally pulling on your coat and making your way to the door. You looked at me as I opened the door, your eyes locking with mine in a moment too long. And then, before I could fully process it, you stepped closer and wrapped your arms around me tightly. The warmth of your embrace, unexpected and gentle, caught me off guard. "Thank you for this," you whispered against my shoulder, your breath warm against my skin. The words hung between us, sincere but fragile, before you slowly pulled away, the distance between us settling once more. I watched as you stepped into the cold night air, the sound of your footsteps fading as you disappeared down the street. I stood there for a long time after you were gone, staring at the empty space where you had been, before closing the door.